Hi Air 11, it's me again, and it's lesson 2 of our environment module. I hope you're all okay. The other day I chose to come out and it was absolutely freezing. Today I've chosen to come out and it's tipping it down. So that's what the weather is, and the weather, remember, will be classed as an abiotic factor. So a non-living thing that is important within our environment. So the amount of rain and obviously increasing the water content of the soil, but I've left my hydrometer at home today. Remember, the hydrometer is the thing that you stick in the ground. It had the lemon on. Stick it in the ground and it measures the amount of electricity that flows between the two prongs. And that can get a reading for you in terms of how much water is in the soil. So today I'm just going to wander around. I've come to my local park just to have a look and to talk about two things. So one of them is interdependence, and the other one is around distribution. Okay, so these are two of the concepts that you'll need to know about. And what we'll do is we will then use this in all of the lessons that follow about ecology, so the study of living things in their environment. So what I'll be doing next lesson is I'll be showing you and demonstrating how you sample and work out the number of each type of organism in a particular habitat. And I'm going to go to a different habitat than I have done today. Even if it's raining or snowing or there's tornadoes or whatever, we'll be doing that. So I'll show you how we can do that, and then hopefully when we're back in school we'll get an opportunity to have a try, because actually it's really interesting. I quite often take the year 11s out onto the field or into the woods down the side of Washington Academy, and we've been to the beach before, like I say, but these are the kind of things that you can do at home, obviously taking into account lockdown precautions and things like that. So anyway, so what we're going to talk about first is interdependence. So inter just means between, and dependence means relies on. So my children are classed as my dependents because they rely on me to feed them and keep them safe. So that's they're dependent on me for that. I'm dependent on you guys for telling me when I do something wrong. Like in a lesson, if I mess up on ClassCharts, or I make a mistake, or it might be that Teams goes all glitchy because I've pressed a button, or I just need to move my internet somewhere. So that's my dependence on you, right? And within any habitat, you've got interdependence where things rely on each other. So one of the examples would be that there's interdependence between the plants here on the ground and the sun, because they need sunlight in order to photosynthesize, to make glucose, and they're doing that for their own survival. But then that glucose gets passed up the food chain, so other animals will rely on it. So a herbivore might eat some of the grass, for example, and then something might eat that herbivore. A predator might eat that herbivore, and we come back to have a look at food chains and food webs a little bit later on. So I won't go into that in too much detail, but without the sun the grass couldn't survive. And when we come to look at we've already looked at extinction in inheritance and selection. We know that if there was an extinction level event like a comet crashing into Earth, then all the dust that kicked up into the atmosphere would stop the plants from getting sunlight. Therefore they would die out because they couldn't photosynthesize and they couldn't make these sugars. And then because of that, what you would find is that that the things that relied on the plants, this interdependence, so the animals that ate the plants, and then the animals that ate the animals that ate the plants, then the animals that ate the animals that ate the animals that ate the plants, and then the animals that ate 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 the plants, I think, they would be affected as well. So we all rely on plants, but we all rely on each other as well, for particularly when we're talking about the habitats. We're talking about food, and some organisms work together really, really well to supply each other with food. And we sometimes find that we end up with something called a symbiotic relationship, which is a kind of like, if I help you out, then you help me out. So an example of that in your digestive system are the friendly bacteria that they always go on about in those healthy yogurt drink, Yakult and Yoplait and those kind of things. What they do there is they talk about healthy bacteria. So those healthy bacteria are really good for you, because what they do is they stay in your digestive system, in your small intestine, and they help you to digest your food more effectively. Now, it's a symbiotic relationship because you're giving them nourishment at the same time, because they don't take all of the food and give it to you. They just take the nutrients that they need, but they help to process the chemicals, which is why those things are really good for your digestive system. then that's a whole scientific investigation in itself. But what we've got is we've got man alive. What we've got is we've got that interdependence between living things. Okay, so for example, this massive tree here that I've kind of like walked into its neighbour. This one here is a flowering tree, and what you'll find is that has an aspect of interdependence on the fact that it will need bees or insects to pollinate it for part of its reproduction. So a bee or a fly or just an insect might come flying along, and what it'll do is it'll pick up some of the pollen, and then it'll transfer it to a flower on another tree, and we'll end up with seeds which will then be distributed, so we don't end up in a situation where all of the trees are growing right next to each other. So if you see, the trees here are spaced out quite a lot. Now this is the bottom of the dell, and I'm going to talk in a minute about why there's lots of mud here. But if you notice that the trees are like really well spaced out, and that's because trees are in competition with each other for sunlight. So they try and get as much sunlight as they possibly can, and if a little tree started to grow here in next to this big tree here, it wouldn't get as much sunlight, so it would be less likely to survive. So plants distributing their offspring is really, really useful, and some examples of those, and we've got, if I just take us up here, we've got some blackberry. I'm going to trip over something else in a second. I'm going to try not to fall after last lesson, but if we go up here, what you'll see is we've got some brambles, and these are really, really sharp. Just be careful if you are out having a look at these. So brambles produce berries, and they don't produce berries to look pretty or to be nice on a cheesecake or something like that. What they do is they produce berries, and inside those berries are seeds. And when a little, probably some kind of mammal or bird comes along and eats the berries, they're eating seeds as well. And what happens is they digest the berries, and the birds get like, and the little mammals, like little mice and all those kind of things, get the nutrients from those berries. And when they're really tasty, they're really attracted to those kind of plants. But what happens is they also get the seeds in them. So it might be that a bird lands on one of these bramble bushes in the summer, and it eats the berry that's on there. And then what it does is it flies away. And then imagine it's like six hours later. And it's gone through its digestive system, it's digested all of the berry, and it's got all the good nutrients, and then it does a great big poo onto the ground. And that poo will contain the seeds, because it can't digest the seeds. And what that means is that you are distributing your plant. It looks like I'm crying, but actually it's all emotional because we're talking about little baby plants. Nothing at all to do with the rain, obviously. So what happens is those seeds will then grow away from the tree, and hopefully they'll be far enough away from other trees to be able to survive, because it won't be in competition for light, for water, for nutrients in the soil. And it's a bit like survival of the fittest, okay? So that's how things get distributed. So there's some interdependence there between the brambles that are over here and the birds and mammals that will eat the berries, because they distribute the food. They distribute the pollen. You see, I'm recording this live so you can see the kind of mistakes that I make, so you don't make them. So what happens is the birds and the mammals eat the berries, and they distribute the seeds. So when they germinate, they start to grow. Usually in springtime, when the conditions are right, then they're hopefully far enough away from the parent plant. So that's distribution. So there's interdependence there, because without the animals distributing those seeds, what you would find that there were tens of thousands of bramble seeds here as they just dropped off the tree, off the bushes, and they would be in massive competition with all of the other brambles and the bramble seeds for light, nutrients in the soil, and for water and sunlight. So it's like it makes sense to try and distribute it in different ways. And you might have seen sycamore seeds, the helicopter things that spin around and around and around and around and around and around. What they do is they fall from a high tree, and as they fall, they start to spin. And you might call them a helicopter. They're sycamore seeds, and they've got the two wings, really like that. And they start to spin when the wind catches their wings. And what that means is that the wind will blow them away from the tree. So when it lands, the little sycamore seed is far enough away from the tree that hopefully it won't be in competition. And it's like dandelions as well. And if it was a different time of year, I'd pick up a dandelion and go And all of those little floaty things are all seeds attached to little parachute type things. And those little furry bits on the top catch the wind. And when the wind blows them, it spreads them out. And that's what distribution is, okay? So we're going to talk about distribution in a second. So we've got interdependence between species, within species. So, for example, when a lioness gets food for its cubs, that's an example of interdependence. You've got some examples there. I've just been put off because this bird has literally just flown in front of us and had a great big poo, and I'm just thinking that that feces would have been absolutely awesome if it had happened on camera, because I was just talking about it, but it didn't, and I haven't got my glasses on, so I can't see where the poo is, and you probably don't want to see some bird poo anyway, but just to let you know that the bird poo does contain some of those seeds. Please don't go and search any bird poos with your fingers to try and find any seeds, because that would just be quite dangerous. So if we had a look in terms of the distribution of plants within this habitat, so this is my local park. I'm going to go somewhere that's a little bit more scenic for the next session next week, but what we've got here is you'll see that as we go across even just this small habitat, we might call this a micro habitat, this park, what you will see is that we've got different plants at different points in the park, and that's because they're distributed, okay? So they're spread out, and they will be spread out based on a couple of different things. One of them will be the amount of space available. So what you'll see that next to the trees, which are really good at collecting all of the water and nutrients from the soil because they've got massive roots, you won't see many other plants. You will see some, but you won't see many other plants because they'll block the sunlight and they will steal the nutrients. So some seeds might land there and the plants might try to grow, but they'll probably die out or they won't get very big. But what you'll see is we've got, like here, for example, we've got a large area of grass. So grass can grow close to each other because they don't need as much sunlight, nutrients and water because they're actually really, really small. So what we've got is we've got a large area of grass in there, and we've got 2 or 3 different kinds of grass in there. Up on the hill, what we see some brambles. Again, this is the other side of the park. And brambles don't need as much water to survive. So if they can grow a bit further away from water, so up the slope, the water moves through the soil, down the hill, towards the bottom. So you would tend to see like kind of a puddle at the bottom, and it'll probably be a puddle in about half an hour's time. But what happens is the water will move through the soil down the hill. So species that need lots of water would not survive and therefore don't grow really on the side of hills because they won't get as much water. But if a species can grow there where there's less water, it's still going to need some water, but where there's less water, then that's great. So that's why you end up with different things in different places. Now, just from a human impact point of view, what you'll see is, as I turn around, we've got a non-natural structure just there. That's a little playground. I might have a go in a minute. What we've got is, if you have a look at this park, you will see that there's a grey area of grass land over here. Now, that's probably not naturally going to be grass because that's used for kids and adults to play around and play football and have a kick around and have picnics and things like that. Not today, obviously, because your sandwiches would get soggy. But the grass area, it gets cut all the time, and that's going to affect the distribution of plants that live there, because some of the larger plants, if they started to grow on the grass there, which they will, and somebody chopped the head off, then if they haven't got enough leaves out there to make energy in order to from photosynthesis in order to grow, then they're not going to grow, they're going to die out. So that's why you tend to see grass, which is a quick growing plant that doesn't need many nutrients, doesn't need too much light, and doesn't need too much water, growing like all over the place, right? But then what you've got is, if you notice, we've got, like I said, the brambles, but then down here we've got, if we came in the winter, in the summer, you would see these ones here. These are like ferns, and you would see those grow a little bit closer to trees. They're quite hardy, so they can grow for a longer period of time than some other plants. So you might be thinking about flowering plants. So it's based on the needs of the individual species, okay? And last time we talked about nocturnal animals, and nocturnal animals are animals that come out at night time to hunt for their prey. So moths, bats, foxes, wolves, all those different kinds of ones. They come out during the night. Now, during the day, In this area, we don't get a lot of native species, because if you can hear, if we just pause for a second, and I'll use my ear, you can hear cars. Okay, so this is right in the middle of the estate that I live in, and everything that's going past is creating noise, so we don't tend to get many animals here, especially during the day when the noise is at its greatest level. So noise pollution is something that we're going to come back to look at when we look at how humans are impacting on the environment, along with global warming and greenhouse gases and the ozone layer and farming and the impact of deforestation. All of those things we're going to look at. But it's important to consider why you might not see much wildlife where you live if you live in an area that's really, really busy. Now, sometimes you do see some plants, you always see some plants when you come down to this park. Sometimes you see some animals, they tend to be a little bit further up, and you tend to see squirrels. Now, I had a little bit of a look before I started recording the video, but there were no squirrels. I couldn't see any, and I'm wet, so I'm not going to hang around wait for a squirrel, because I could be here all day. And really, I'm kind of like coming towards the end of my daily exercise time, so I need to get back home and stay at home, quarantine. Don't go out and mix with people, all of those things. And I'm not wearing my mask because there's nobody else around. So what you might find is you might find squirrels. Now, squirrels love places like this because there's lots of trees, so they can get hold of plenty of food. There's plenty of cover, and what you would see is maybe when things are a little bit quieter, probably my voice and the cars aren't helping, you'd see some squirrels scampering around. So there will be squirrels here, but they'll just be hiding. So their distribution, where they are, is probably somewhere in those bushes or up in some of the trees. We can see some birds there flying around. And next week, we'll be looking at how we can count the number of different species, the population of different species in a particular habitat, both plants and animals. You only really need to know for the syllabus about plants, but I'm going to tell you a bit about the animals as well, because it's like really interesting and it's something that you can do when you're out and about. Obviously obeying all social distancing rules and things like that. So what we've got is the distribution, so the spread of species within a habitat, and we've also got our interdependence, the way on which things rely on each other. I was hoping I would see a squirrel, but I still haven't. But what you would see is, if we just look here, even though this is a park, you will see that the plants are distributed differently around the park. Now, again, this is a park, not a really open environment, but you'll see a change in terms of the plants that you will see, and that's because of all of the environmental factors. So ones that really thrive on having lots of water, you might find further down. So things like those ferns, things that don't need quite as much water, you would find on the slopes, so like the brambles and things like that. Up at the top of the park, you would find different kinds of bushes, because there's a slight incline going up the park. Hopefully you saw that and it didn't make you feel too sick. There's a slight incline going up the park, and what that means is that at the top of the park, it's going to be dry, the soil's going to be drier, and you tend to find like the things like ivy are really good at growing anywhere. We saw some natural ivy in the last one. We've got some that's possibly natural ivy, or possibly start to grow in this garden over here. It looks like the Addams family house, which is cool. I like the Addams family. So what you see is the ivy, and because ivy can climb, it can get really, really long. It can reach up to try and grab more sunlight. So it can grow next to other living things. And we saw last week, on the last one, we saw some bits where the ivy was growing up a tree. And the way that it can do that is because it can grow up and up and up, so it's able to get the light it needs for photosynthesis, to make the glucose that it needs for energy. It's still got its roots in the ground, so it still can collect the nutrients and the water that it needs. And it's in a bit of competition with the trees, but because it can climb up, it's got an advantage over plants that can't climb up. Now, with ivy, what you'll find is that it doesn't have a solid trunk. It's got like a very flexible stem, so it doesn't use many nutrients and energy to make hard materials like a tree does, so that it can continue to grow. And actually, what you find sometimes is that we end up with things called invasive species. So an invasive species is a species that isn't really supposed to be in a particular area, but somehow it gets introduced and then it takes over. So an example that we've talked about in the past in inheritance and selection was around with Madagascar, where ships landed and accidentally introduced rats onto the island of Madagascar that end up massively reducing the population of dodos. So did the humans, therefore the dodos went extinct. But the rats that were introduced were called an invasive species. They invade. Right, I hope you've found this useful. If now that you've seen this, you could come back onto Teams, where I'll explain what we're going to do for the rest of this lesson. But also what I'll do as well is I'll answer any questions you've got. So what we'll do is, if you come back to Teams, and hopefully it won't glitch. Hopefully it won't glitch too much. But if you come back to Teams, any questions, you can email us, and I'll talk about what we're going to do from there. And we're going to keep going in terms of coming out in the environment. I can show you things and explain things from a point of view, and I'm just twisting around because it's quite cool and it looks like I know what I'm doing, but I've started to get dizzy. So at that point I'm going to stop. So thanks for watching, guys. I hope you're all right. Take care, ask any questions, and stay awesome, please. I know you will, because you are.